Once upon a time, there was a species that loved stories, that loved telling stories and hearing stories. And then we invented the printing press, and we started writing stories and publishing stories and reading stories, stories by the millions. And it's how we make sense of the world. It's really who we are. And this is why I became a journalist, to write and tell and, turns out, edit stories. It started actually with a magazine that's published by a company that I would work for 15 years later. I just graduated from college. I was riding the streetcar in San Francisco to my dismal job as a paralegal, downtown San Francisco, wearing a suit that I had just bought last week and feeling like a total fraud. And I started reading The New Yorker. And the first thing that struck me in there was these movie reviews. They weren't anything like the movie reviews I'd read in the San Jose Mercury News growing up as a kid. These were like these loose-limbed, conversational, smart takes on movies that weren't just about movies. They were about culture and politics and art. And these were the reviews of Pauline Kael, who was the reviewer for The New Yorker. Most of you are too young to have read her in her prime, and I was even on the tail end of her career. But she influenced a whole generation of not just movie reviewers, but art reviewers in this country. And then in the fall of that year, The New Yorker published a 3-part series on this guy, the Bhagwan Shree Rajneesh. He was a cult leader in Oregon, and Francis Fitzgerald told this amazing story about him. It had this arc. It had amazing characters. It had drama and conflict. He started off as this charismatic leader, and he became wealthy. He bought a whole fleet of Rolls Royces. He bilked his followers. He was indicted. He went on the lam. He was finally arrested. It was just a great story. And my mind was kind of blown. I didn't realize that that kind of storytelling could be done in a nonfiction way. I'd been an English major. I was really into novel writing. I was thinking about this last night, and I had read Joan Didion, who was another sort of icon of nonfiction, literary nonfiction, but for some reason it didn't stick. But when I read this story, something changed. And I decided, I'm not going to go to law school. I'm going to go to journalism school instead. And what I had discovered at that point was that a story can change your life. It can change the way you think about the world, the way you see the world. It can change your future. It can actually rearrange the neural structure of your brain, and that will stick with you forever. That was really powerful for me. And this kept happening. It keeps happening to me. I remember reading a Bill Buford story about soccer hooligans in 1993. And it was just this incredible journey into the mob. And he ran with these soccer hooligans, and that just really sticks with me. And then there was, more recently in The New Yorker, this piece about Frédéric Bourdin, who was an imposter. And he was like a 27-year-old man, but he would masquerade as a teenager and go to high school at these French schools until there was some suspicion raised, and then he'd move on to the next town. And this is a David Grann piece. If you get a chance to sort of look at the work of David Grann, he's amazing. There's always like a great twist in his stories. More recently, there was a piece in Wired last year that we're going to submit for a National Magazine Award, written by Gideon Lewis Krauss. And it's basically, he went inside one startup in San Francisco. And he tells the story of the struggle that these guys go through and what it's really like. And he strips away all the glamour and kind of conventional stuff that you read about startups, and it really makes you see what it's like, while explaining the economics and the politics. And when you finish reading that, you're a different person. You've changed. You've gotten this new understanding. And this is the magic of magazines. And the thing that has so entranced me in my career is the way that they take all of these elements, the printed word, first of all, and when I say printed, I just mean the word, because it shows up not just in print, and combine it with photography and illustration and typography, graphic design, and turn it into this seamless, immersive experience that holds your attention and that becomes this really compelling experience. So like I said, I went, I bailed on law school and I went to journalism school instead. So fast forward 22 years, and as Jennifer said, I'm the features editor at Wired now, and I work in print, but also with web stories and web-only features, with the tablet and tablet-only features. We're still working on a phone app. I think, maybe I'll ask you later if you think a phone app would be a good thing for Wired. And also, we've dabbled in doing ebooks as well. And I get to assign and work on all those things. So I was a print guy before, when I started my career. And that made sense because, well, when I started at Wired in 2001, the conventional wisdom was nobody's going to read long form online. Like, nobody has the attention span, it's too ugly, there's blink tags, it's just, no one's going to read online. And there was a divide between the print side and the digital side. You had one set of editors and writers who worked in the digital realm and another set that worked in print. In fact, this persisted at Wired up until as recently as 2009. I don't know if you guys know about the blog Boing Boing. It's kind of a tech blog, but there was an internet famous post on that blog that when Joel Johnson wrote about the Great Hall of Wired. It's this hallway that in our building in San Francisco. We're in this warehouse building on we have the whole third floor, and there's a hallway that separates the people who work on digital and the people who work on print. And the idea was that you couldn't cross that hall without being shot down by guards. But 2 years ago, we got a new editor-in-chief, Scott Dadich, and he made it a huge priority to integrate the two staffs. And so the Great Hall of Wired is actually demolished now. About 6 months ago, we instituted this remodel of the office, and the entire thing was knocked down, and everybody moved to one side of the office, and now we're all kind of combined and actually smushed into this one side of the building while the other side is being renovated. But eventually, when everybody spreads out over the whole floor, everyone's going to be working together. So the divide is going away, literally, in the sense of the office. But it's also going away in people's minds. You know, I said that I always thought of myself as a print guy, but that's no longer true. In fact, I just had a conversation with one of my colleagues where I kind of admitted, I'm really excited about the digital stuff. Like when I see what we can do online or on the tablet, I get kind of psyched up the way I used to when the print magazine would come. And now when the print magazine comes, and this actually kind of hurts my soul, I'm just not that excited. I'm saying, okay, yeah, I can always read it online. So that's a real change. But I think you can tell, like, I'm really enthusiastic and optimistic about the future of these kinds of long-form pieces that used to be thought of as unreadable online. And I think they have tremendous potential, in fact. So like I said, a magazine story can change your life, and we're just learning how to do that seamless thing that I was talking about with photography and illustration. These were all used online. And with cooler things like this portrait of this artist that turns into an infographic that then turns into the beginning of the scroll of a story. And there are these sort of magical elements that we can start to draw on to make really compelling reading experiences. And I want to talk a little bit about that. But before we go on, I just want to clarify a term. Long form is used a lot. There's a long reads. It's all about long. Like, how long is it? Is it 6,000 words, 8,000 words, 10,000 words? And one of my colleagues, Rob Capps, says that that's exactly the wrong thing to focus on. That it's not about long. In fact, long sounds kind of intimidating and a little bit self-indulgent. Like, hey, it's digital, so we don't need to worry about space. We can just let it run as long as we want. And I think he's right. But the fact is that this kind of journalism takes a lot of resources and a lot of time, and it means going out in the world and then crafting pieces and editing pieces and trying to get them to a really high level. So my theory is that if there's a reason to call it long read, it's because it takes a long time, not because it's necessarily long. I want to keep some discipline there. So as Jennifer said, I used to be a newspaper reporter, and when I was thinking about what I wanted to say today, I thought, well, I have some experience, but let me go and talk to the experts. So I went and did some reporting, and I talked to a bunch of people who are sort of pioneering the digital realm of long-form storytelling and curating, and I talked to the guy at Longreads, Mark Armstrong, and Longform, Max Linsky, and Evan Ratliff, who's at The Atavist, and Joshua Davis, who's doing something called Epic. He's been a long-time writer of mine, but now he's kind of starting his own thing. And I sifted through some of this stuff and came to some conclusions. So I'm going to share those with you this morning in the form of some questions that I hope I have some answers to as we look down the road. So who's producing long form? This is, of the 5 Ws, this is probably the easiest one on my list here. And the answer is, seems like everybody. Old standbys like the New Yorker and the New York Times and the Atlantic, the New York Times Magazine, but also all these digital startups, like Grantland and Atavist, I mentioned, Eon, The All, Epic's up there. But there's also this other kind of cool thing that's happening with this profusion of long-form stuff that's going online is all these curators who are helping people find these stories and promote them, like long reads and long form. I talked about Pocket, readability, the browser. And that says something, I think. There's something going on here. There's definitely smoke. And there's a little bit of data to back it up. The proportion of stories, news and media as a share of all online visits is staying pretty flat, or has stayed pretty flat for the last 3 years. But the proportion of long-form visits is going up. It's still a really small percentage, I'll grant you that. But the trend is pretty clear. Next question. Why is long-form gaining traction with readers? And I've got 3 answers to that, including one that's kind of a hobby horse. I hope you'll indulge me. So the first one is these guys. Phones and tablets, mobile, is increasingly the way people actually consume these stories. And it's kind of like freed these stories to be part of our leisure time, to be able to sit on the couch comfortably, lay in bed and read these stories, catch 10 screens while you're standing in line at Trader Joe's. Do they have Trader Joe's here? Oh, okay. 37% of news and web news and information browsing now happens on mobile. Second reason is attention spans. So we're in the age of the gnat-like attention span, the 140-word read it and go. But there's a flip side to that, I believe, which is that people's attention spans are becoming huge if you give them something compelling to look at, read, or play. My wife and I just started catching up with this guy. What is it, 5 seasons, 20 seasons, 20 shows each season, something like that? I mean, it's literally hundreds of hours of stuff, and they'll consume it in 2 weeks. I mean, that's an attention span. Another example is this web network called Twitch. You guys know about this? It's where I see some of these, some nodding. It's mostly watching other people play games, and it is incredibly popular. It has, what are the numbers? 45 million, an audience of 45 million, average age of 21. It was just bought by Amazon for $1.1 billion. And the average time spent per visit, when someone goes there to hang out and experience this content, 106 minutes. That's an attention span. That's not 140 characters. My latest favorite example is Slow TV. This is a Norwegian phenomenon. You might have read about this on the New Yorker. This is a clip from a 7.5-hour high-def train journey from Bergen to Oslo in Norway, Bergensbanen minute for minute. It was incredibly popular in Norway. People would watch all 7.5 hours of this, and it's just the camera trained on the track. Another encouraging sign is that books are more popular than ever. In fact, younger people read more books than older people. Was this last year? Yeah. 88% of Americans younger than 30 had read a book. Now, this is, over the entire American population. Remember, like only 30% of those people have college degrees. And 77, which I thought was pretty high, of people older than 30 had read a book. I'm assuming it's not a comic book. Not that there's anything wrong with that. And then I just have to mention this one other example because my colleague Jason Tanz is really into this. There's a 6-volume sort of lightly fictionalized autobiography by this author named Karl Ove Knausgård called My Struggle. And it's 3,600 words. It's 6 volumes, and it's incredibly, it's a worldwide literary sensation. So people have an attention span, and it goes across all media. All we have to do is give them something that's compelling. That was point 2 in the three points of why. The third one is the rise of social media. Those 140 character tweets are alerting people to 40,000 word, well, that's too long, 4,000, 6,000 word, to edit myself on the fly, articles. And they're surfacing them. And people like to do this because it's like there's a self-reinforcing incentive in that, you feel good about having read something, you feel like maybe your life has been changed by reading something, and then you want to share it. And then you get to sort of look to all of your followers like, hey, I'm somebody who reads long form. So there's this like sort of self-reinforcing thing that happens. This was huge in this piece that we did last year, which I just kind of like the opener that we did on the web. It was a web-only story, in fact. It didn't have any life in print. And each break in the story had these little video clips of somebody playing a video game. And it was about this guy who, this 37-year-old marketing executive in New York, who transformed his one-bedroom apartment into a shrine to 80s video games. And you'll never guess what happened. He lost his girlfriend. And that's why we called it a love story. He was trying to get her back, though. It was really quite touching. But it went viral, is my point. And it had more than 6 million unique viewers, and it spread through those viral sources, especially Facebook. What makes long form so valuable? So I'm going to talk a little bit about the business of publishing here. and I have sort of three answers for you on this too. The first one is kind of the converse to the question, which is that the reason it's valuable is that it's not a commodity. It's special. I was listening to NPR a couple of weeks ago, and Shane Smith, the CEO of Vice, was talking about what they do, which is also to try to create really unique things. And he said that commodity news is kind of like a bunch of kids chasing a soccer ball. You know, the ball goes over here, and all the news sources go over here. And the ball goes over here, and they chase it over here. And they're all basically going back and writing the same story. And I'm sure you've experienced this. Like if you're really interested in something, you'll go and read a story, and then you'll be like, well, okay, so what does The Verge have to say about it? Like I read a lot of tech news, so you go over to The Verge, and it's kind of the same story, and it's really hard to differentiate yourself from other people. But a long-form story, as I've said, is unique. It doesn't chase the news, it makes news. And if you produce a story like that, expensive and time-consuming though it may be, you're going to be the only one who has it, and that makes it valuable. And I guess the third point, and kind of a related one, is that a magazine story can change your life. It's this moment that's really valuable in the sense that if you're an advertiser and you can be associated with that, that rubs off on you, that sort of momentous experience. Over the summer, in August, we published a profile of Edward Snowden that was based on an exclusive that we got. We sent a writer named James Bamford to Moscow, and he spent 3 days with Snowden. And I love the way that we had this is the web execution. We had this portrait, and then the headline comes up, and then he fades away, and then you start to scroll. And it's just a sort of way to focus you and bring you into the text. But I was really struck, you know, under the heading of an article can change your life. The day after we published this piece, I got an email from my dad. And he worked for a defense contractor for 35 years and was a lifelong Republican. And is not the kind of person you think would be very sympathetic to Edward Snowden. But he wrote me in all caps, of course, that this story was amazing and it's totally changed the way I think about this guy, and I hope he gets a fair shake. So to me, that was a great example of how a story like this can change you and change your point of view. Okay. So, you know, on a related note, in terms of business, what's in it for publishers? 3 answers on this front as well. One is that, and maybe this is just self-aggrandizement because this is, you know, something that I do that's really important to me, but it's a prestige thing. You know, like if you're a publisher and you're just pumping out listicles, and then all of a sudden you start a division to do long-form stuff, and you start breaking news with investigations or breaking hearts with stories that are really compelling, suddenly you get respect from readers, from very especially now and it just puts a halo of respectability around you. I don't know if you guys read BuzzFeed, but they now have a really well-respected long-form vertical, I guess you'd call it, called BuzzReads, and they're doing really cool things. And so are a lot of other people. And I think that's one of the reasons. A second one, and this might seem like inside baseball, but I feel this as someone who tries to hire people, both freelance and full-time, is that it's a great morale booster within a journalistic organization. Like these are the kind of stories that people want to work on because they're so powerful. And they're a way of inspiring you know, journalists within an organization, giving them a chance to do important work that feels like it's going to last more than just through the next mini news cycle that day on the web. So yeah, writers and editors. And the third one, and I will confess that this may be falsifiable, we'll see. Time will tell. But I think there's a fortune to be made, and that's a big one. So let me back up a little bit. For 20 years, or 20 years ago, in the last 20 years, all this editing, in the last 20 years, the web has changed incredibly. You know, if you think back, if you can remember that far, some of you, to your toddler days, like the web of 1994 was pretty ugly, pretty glitchy, didn't do very much. Fast forward 20 years, now it's incredibly interactive. It's database driven. It can act like a TV. It can act like a news source. It can act like a radio. It can do a lot of things. But during that 20 years, one thing, well, maybe other things, but one thing that hasn't changed is the click. It's still the measurement for audiences, for publishers, the click. And this may have been okay when the web first started, but it has led to all kinds of perverse incentives. Clickbait, SEO, spam, listicles, junk, cats. Perverse incentives to just try to get as many clicks as you can. And everybody who publishes under this model, including Wired, lives under the tyranny of the click. But advertisers, and I think readers, I mean, you guys, I would like to hear your point of view on this, but the sort of the bait and switch and the unpleasant experience of going to a crappy story that you thought was going to be cool because of the headline, like, people are starting to get wise to that. And there's a new model that's coming that's based, like a lot of other media, like most other media, not on clicks or even impressions, but on time. How much time do you spend with something? How deeply does it engage you? And I think, obviously, this is going to be a really great development for this kind of writing that we're talking about. Chartbeat, which is the company that measures audiences for most of the big publishers on the web, including Wired and Condé Nast, just rolled out a new engagement metric. Some of the other companies that do this are doing the same thing. And Chartbeats was endorsed by the Media Rating Council, which apparently is a big deal. I had never heard of that, but they set the standards for measuring content and ads. And the idea is that we're going to see the rise of the attention economy, where people's attention can be turned into something that you can sell. And this is just going to change all the incentives for how we get people to click on stuff. Now, I grant you that it could just lead to really excellent cat videos. And sure, that's going to be part of it. But at least the kind of journalism that we've been talking about and the kind of writing and storytelling is going to have pride of place in an ecosystem where attention and engagement and life-changing stories are valued. Tony Hale, who's the CEO of Chartbeat, has been talking about this in the trade press, and he said something I thought was really pretty interesting, that this attention economy has the power to create something that's sorely lacking right now in the click-based economy, and that is scarcity. With scarcity, you have a better alignment of supply and demand. He said that every potential reader only has so much time, and capturing that time and delivering it to advertisers will become extremely valuable. Just like any economy of scarcity, anyone who captures the most of it can charge more. So that's, as somebody who has to pay writers, that's pretty exciting to me. And the idea is, the little bit of industry jargon, we'd move from CPM, which is cost per 1,000 views, to CPH, cost per hour, or maybe a new CPM, cost per minute. So I just want to, so there's some signs that this is actually happening, that it's not just the fantasy of one features editor at Wired. There is a relatively new publishing platform you guys have probably heard of called Medium. It's was founded by Ev Williams, who was one of the founders of Twitter. So there's a little bit of irony there. The 140 character guy has now become the reader guy. And for a long time, he was just funding this platform for people to publish for free and no advertising. But recently, they had their first experience in advertising. And what it is a sponsorship of this design vertical called Reform. And it's not based on clicks, it's based on attention. And BMW put a sizable hunk of investment in this. That, I think, is a hopeful sign. The Atavist, which usually sells one-offs, and they have basically a subscription model or a pay-as-you-go model, got this story by Joshua Behrman sponsored by Warby Parker, the eyeglass maker. Narratively, which is this cool site that tells stories mostly out of New York City, has a weekly sponsor. This was the Financial Times sponsored them. And again, it's not on clicks, it's about attention. Even Wired is dabbling in this. Oakley, and you can see their little logo up in there, sponsored a series of stories, including this great one by, who wrote this? Doug Copeland, who, he's just a wonderful Canadian writer about the fate of Bell Labs. So what is the future of long form? My answer to that is we're inventing it right now, and I've shown you a couple examples, and I want to show you a few more. But you know, those elements that I talked about that we use in print, photography and illustration and typography and graphic design, that you combine into this immersive experience in print. There are other tools that we're going to be able to draw on, including motion, animation, sound. And we're just starting to figure that out. You probably know about Snowfall, the New York Times sort of groundbreaking multimedia presentation of a long-form story. That's one example. In my view, that actually got to be a little bit too distracting. And that's the question. We have to find a balance between these elements the way we did in print, so that it all goes together to support and tell this one story in the most compelling way possible. I just wanted to give you a couple examples that I really liked that Wired recently did. We did a whole package online about this rolling art project called Station to Station. And one of the artists that was featured was named Petra Cartwright, and she does self-portraits. So you're reading along about this, and you come to this horizontal screen, and you get this, it auto-animates, and you get one of her digital portraits that we've been writing about. And you just kind of see what she does and how it comes, and suddenly on the page it comes to life. Another example, what is the next example? Yes. We sent a guy to Syria to write about the rebels, and he did a portrait of this group of guys who create improvised explosives for the anti-government forces. And I just like the opening. It starts with just the headline, and then you get this, and then it scrolls. And you're immediately brought in, and with this typographic treatment. Yeah. But I misspoke. This was a different Syria story. Sorry about this. It was a Middle East story. This was about eradicating polio in Afghanistan, but it was the same writer, Matt Aitken. And then one more story that I edited was about the rise of new technology in cannabis production. All kinds of entrepreneurs are jumping in, and they're building like high-tech vaporizers and new ways of growing, indoors. And I just like this opener. Just starts with the headline, very understated. Then this art comes in, and then finally the deck sort of drops in. And it's just another way of drawing readers in. So all of these examples that I just showed you were somewhat labor-intensive, resource-intensive. They took a lot more than your average blog post which is very formatted and just can be put up like that. But it paid off because all of them had more than 2 million uniques, and they kind of broke through the noise for the reasons that I've been talking about. So once upon a time, there was a species that loved to tell stories. And now we're gathering around these digital campfires and telling stories. And I'm very optimistic about the future for that kind of storytelling. Thanks.